Hey everybody, it's Brian House here for Housework, and today we are working with some A-2 tool steel. I've got a couple of goals today for this piece of steel, but first I wanted to just talk about why I'm using A-2 tool steel to make a knife. Well, I actually got this really super cheap. This is 0.187 or 3/16 of an inch thick by 5 inches wide by 36 inches long, and I got 10 pieces of this delivered to my studio for $224.80, which is a really good deal. I've never worked with A2 before, but the pricing was such that I just couldn't pass it up. So I went online, bought it, had it shipped in, and it's been kind of hanging out for a while because it's a little thick for what I like to do. And I woke up this morning thinking, well, why don't I throw a piece of it on the mill, thin it down, and then we can kind of go from there as far as working with making knives with A2 tool steel. Now, A2 is high in carbon, which means it's really hard, and it's low in chromium. From what I've read, I've gotten some conflicting reports on that, so I'm not 100% sure, but I have heard that it rusts rather quickly. So it definitely needs to be treated and then cared for with oils and made sure that oxidation doesn't occur, which I'm totally fine with, by the way. I think that's 100% acceptable because the good outweighs the bad. A2 tool steel is very unique. When you heat treat it, it doesn't require a quench. It's an air hardening steel, which means you bring it to temperature to where it needs to be, and then you drop the temperature 40 degrees Fahrenheit per hour until you reach a specific temperature, and then it's hard. You temper it just like any other steel, and then you move on. I've never done that before, but it doesn't seem too complicated, and I kind of like the idea of having an air-hardened steel. So going down the path of learning a new skill set, air hardening steel, and working with a new material, I want to take this piece of steel, cut out a piece big enough to fit this really cool little kitchen knife. I downloaded this from DC Knives website. If you haven't been to Dan's website, he has a bunch of these free templates out there. This is a nice little small knife that you can experiment with. I've made a couple of these already and they're very cool. So I'm going to use this as my example to try and work with this steel. We're going to take it, like I said, cut it down big enough to where I can put it in the mill and thin it down. And then we're going to cut out the knife, profile it, and then heat treat it. Let's do it. Turn the speed down just a little bit on the porta-bandsaw table to cut through this hard stuff. I've never actually worked with it or cut it at all, so this is new to me. So a couple of downsides to that swag off-road porta-bandsaw table is obviously the issues with the depth of cutting, but an aluminum oxide wheel cut through this pretty simply. I mean, it was easy. It didn't take much time at all. And then I just took it over on my 2x72 belt grinder and took that flat edge off. I just built that top platen, and it's already proving to be super useful. So that made this, getting this nice edge, this straight edge, really easy to do. So that was pretty amazing. Now, the next step of this is I just want to draw out the template here because I need to drill a couple of holes in the steel so I can mount it to the mill. The best way to do this is I'm not going to try to take off all of the steel, just in the places where I'm going to cut the knife off, cut the knife out. I want to be able to mount it to my table on my mill, and the only way I really can figure out how to do that is to put a couple of holes in the billet itself and basically bolt it to the table so it doesn't move while I'm thinning it down. So if I put a hole, maybe do one right there. Definitely one down here, maybe one in the middle. I don't know, to see. been a while since that vise has been off of this table, so taking a few minutes and cleaning it up. This is a piece of aluminum, by the way. I had some leftover 1095 and I just drilled some holes in it, made them 1 by 1, and these grooves in the mill table are 1 inch, so it should slide right in there. Put some bolts in it. If we play our cards right, get to sit nice and flat. I'll have to move some things around, I think, while we're actually doing it, but yeah. Now that I'm thinking about it, might need to pop a weld. Just pop a quick weld on there to keep those from spinning around. All right, so now we got our little mounts here made up. Not the prettiest thing in the world, but they don't have to be. And yeah, no, I can just go and buy a set of these, but when you got all the stuff to make it, why wouldn't you? All right, let's swap out our drill bit and our chuck for our mill. A couple of things we got to really pay attention to is how tight this is once we drop the mill down to a milling height. So we got to loosen a couple of big bolts here. We're going to drop the mill down to make sure that we can get the milling tool where our steel's going to be. But then once you do that, this whole head is loose. So you gotta make sure that you retighten that. Okay, well, for having never done that before, that went fairly smooth. And I took down the stock probably about half, I think. Didn't really measure anything, I just kind of did it. So let's take a look. Grab the caliper, measure this thing. This went pretty good. I picked up just a slight curve in the steel, probably from heat, just warming it up. In the future, I may not go as aggressively. I'm just going to check to see where we started and where we left off. So we're at 4.767 4.67 millimeters down to 2.45 millimeters. So that's almost half. Check it in American standard here. So it started out at 3/16 of an inch, and we are at 3/32. So we took this down just about half And you might say that that's a lot of work to take a piece of steel and knock it down like this. And I agree, it's a lot of work to do it, but if you've ever really wanted to make something but didn't quite have the right thing to make that, but you have the tools to actually modify it to make it work, hey, why not, you know? And we learned something in the process. So I'm excited to profile this thing out and cut it out on the bandsaw and get it into the heat treat. So I am really impressed with this steel so far. I'm actually, there's a couple things that I gotta say. I just recently built this top plat, and if you haven't already watched that video, you should go out and watch this. I didn't realize how useful it really was going to be. I just ground down a knife really quickly with it, and I was impressed at the directions I'm able to get, the angles I'm able to get, how much of the knife I'm able to get on the platen and so on. And also I can grind down the little tiny spots here with the small wheel attachment here, and then immediately switch back over to the platen. That is a really cool feature of having that top platen attachment. 100% worth the time and effort it took to build it. And like I said, I made a video about it, so you should go back and check that out if you're interested. I went ahead and ground it down a little bit. It's got a little bit of a potato chip warp in it, nothing too bad. I know I can get that out in the temper. I'm not concerned about that. I did leave a few of the mill marks here on the blade itself. It doesn't really bother me because that's under the handle. The blade is nice and light, and I'm actually stoked about how the steel moves. It moves really nicely, actually. So it's a little softer than some of the steels that I've worked with, like 1095 and 80 CRV2. It's a little bit softer, I think. But I'm digging it so far. So got to put a couple of holes in the handle for the brass pins, and then get it into the heat treat. Okay, so I went ahead and milled down some more pieces on the mill and figured if I'm gonna fire that kiln up to 1800 degrees, I might as well, you know, heat treat about, 3 to 5 knives at the same time. I really hate waste, so firing that thing all the way up to, whatever temperature and then bring it back down, tempering the whole thing. I like to do everything in batches. It just makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more efficient. One of the things I really wanted to mention about A-2 tool steel is initially I thought it was softer, and it is in some respects, but the moment you heat it up, let's say while you're cutting it on the bandsaw, what I noticed was if I were to slow down or stop, the blade would heat up enough to where it would slightly harden, and it chewed through one of my really nice new Milwaukee blades. And I thought, wow, this stuff really does air harden, so you have to be careful with how much you heat it up. So I started doing some reading on it, and everyone that has worked with A2 on the blade forums and such, they said if you heat it up and you harden it on accident, it's really hard to work with. So, and that's exactly what I found out. So I decided to go ahead and do a little bit more of the grinding on these blades just to get them up to speed, so that when I do take them and start to actually put an edge on them and everything and bevel them down, there isn't a whole lot of work involved in that. So, and on another note, I was initially planning on doing the heat treat this week. I had a couple of issues with my kiln, so I'm gonna go ahead and not heat treat these blades right now, because I've also read some conflicting information as to what the cool down looks like. Everyone agrees that you got to bring it up to 1400 degrees, let it soak for a bit, then ramp it up to 1750, 1800, and then let it air cool. Some websites say 40-degree drop Fahrenheit per hour. Some say just hang it and let it air dry or air cool out in the still air. which sounds a lot like normalizing to me. So I'm confused, and I really want to get some clarification on that before I waste a whole bunch of time and go through that process and just screw it all up. So if you got something out of this video and you do want to see me heat treat some A-2 steel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because I'll be posting that video sometime next week. Again, thank you so much. My name is Brian House, and this is Housework.